I think sometimes we forget that PEPFAR has ended. Sometimes we forget that all the USAID money that came to South Africa was ended.
Where is the South African government in all of this? I mean, there appears to be a strategic communications vacuum here. The people that are controlling the narrative in the US are the ones who want this bill to be passed. Isn't this a crucial time for us to have someone on the ground there, given this development and, of course, the tariffs that are coming our way in August? I mean, where's Mcebisi Jonas?
I'm not sure what the status is of Special Envoy Mcebisi Jonas.
How should our government respond then? I mean, there are those who argue that just give up. Nothing we do or say will convince the US Republican lawmakers otherwise. So they argue that silence and us not saying much is actually a diplomatic message as well. But does that work for us?
Let our critical minerals like platinum speak for themselves. Let's drive a bargain. You see, Trump does not respect weakness. He does.
So from what you understand about processes in the US and as far as lawmaking is concerned, is it a big deal that this bill has now progressed from the committee to the House?
Look, I think it is a big deal. I think the costs could be enormous. I think that we have had many steps taken against South Africa. I think sometimes we forget that PEPFAR has ended. Sometimes we forget that all the USAID money that came to South Africa was ended, that we've been punished through the World Health Organization, the JETP, all of those kind of things have happened. And basically, I think we now also have the 30% tariffs plus the possibility of 10% because of our BRICS membership. Yeah. So this is another step and possibly just not the heaviest of steps that can be taken, but symbolically, I think it is particularly pernicious that this is being done. And it was no irony that you had two white Congress members making the case and Representative Meeks, a black Congress member, pushing back on it. And so I think that says a lot about what is going on and what is taking root in the USA against South Africa.
So Republicans control the House and the Senate, albeit with a narrow majority. What are the chances that this will go through, given the sentiment in Washington, D.C.? Is there broad bipartisan support from what you've observed so far?
I think that from what I know is that there are even Democrats who feel uncomfortable with some of South Africa's foreign policy positions. There are Democrats who did not like the fact that we took Israel to the ICJ for genocide and that we are part of BRICS and all of those kind of things. But I think that many of them would not go as far as to want South Africa and the ANC leaders sanctioned to that extent, and still see South Africa as very influential in Africa, very important in the global South, a critical, best democratic countries within BRICS. And so I don't think that there is a universal sense, and what needs to be done is to separate out the very kind of heavy MAGA Republicans, even from your liberal Republicans, and certainly to try and make sure that the hawks in the Democrats are separated from the mainstream of the Democrats. That's the kind of diplomatic work that needs to be done. And it doesn't only have to be done with Congress members and senators. It has to be done with the think tanks, the business associations, the churches, because that's South Africa's constituency in the USA.
Yes, and we'll get to what work needs to be done in the USA in a moment. But as you say, the committee chairman, Brian Mast, said that the country's case against Israel at the International Court of Justice is further proof of worsening relations between South Africa and the US. Who is Congressman Ronnie Jackson, though? I mean, does he have any links to Apex? And if so, why does that matter?
I'm not too sure that there are many who have not links with APAC. I'm not sure that you can find too many who have not been funded by APAC. And so without making APAC the big bogeyman, I think its influence is very definitive. I think APAC is the third circle within three supremacisms that I think is emerging. They've been egged on by our own ex-white supremacists from South Africa in the so-called Afrikaner, so-called refugee community. They've spoken into the MAGA where Ronnie Jackson comes from. And I think that they are being aided and abetted and influenced by that third wheel of supremacism, Zionist supremacism, that AIPAC represents in the USA. And so South Africa is up against a tough task. I think the US can't feel that heavily against China when they are dependent on China.
Yeah.
So that's not the big case. We've assured them that it was South Africa, amongst others, that stopped the de-dollarization resolution. That's not going to be enough for them. And certainly, I think that even Trump has warmed up to Russia and Vladimir Putin. And so that is not one of the main issues.
So, and isn't that interesting? Because what the bill is trying to direct is for the US government to reevaluate these diplomatic, trade and military ties with South Africa, citing Pretoria's recent engagements with global powers such as Russia, China and Iran. But as you say, the US itself can engage with these world powers and we can't?
I think I go back to what Nelson Mandela said to the USA right at the beginning of his presidency. Don't tell us who our friends are when you were our enemies during apartheid and you were friends of the apartheid government. I think it comes very much to the same situation that we need to reiterate, but we also say that now, knowing our relative dependence economically on the United States, we're dealing with the fallout of our dependence on health funding and social funding and so forth. But the fact of the matter is, I think we need to be able to say that this is double standards, this is hypocrisy.
Yeah.
You can't cozy up to Putin, you can't do a deal with China and then tell us where to get off, and you can't be warned by Iran that your base in Qatar will be bombed and you don't want us to have any ties with Iran. And so I think we are dealing with a geopolitics of absolute hypocrisy. I think therefore that I come back to the point that got me into trouble in the first point. I can't understand any rationality for what is going on in the US except a supremacist drive that dislikes the very idea of South Africa of being a non-racial democracy.
Yeah, and if you call it out, of course, then that becomes something else. If you really point out these contradictions. Here's the question though, where is the South African government in all of this? I mean, there appears to be a strategic communications vacuum here. The people that are controlling the narrative in the US are the ones who want this bill to be passed. I mean, someone in DC was telling me earlier today that South Africa is nowhere to be seen in DC. Even when embassies had open days, there was not much activity at the South African embassy. Isn't this a crucial time for us to have someone on the ground there, given this development and of course the tariffs that are coming our way in August? I mean, where's Mcebisi Jonas?
I'm not sure what the status is of Special Envoy Mcebisi Jonas, but I do want to say that I believe that there was a deliberate attempt to denude South Africa of a voice in Washington, of a presence in Washington, of making the kind of inroads where you speak to think tanks every week, to church groups every Sunday, in order to speak to business associations regularly, and to get through the doors of Congress and Senate and turn the narrative around. We have a compelling case. We have a convincing case against a flimsy argument from the USA, and I suspect that is why they don't want a diplomatic presence in the USA from South Africa. And certainly, I think that South Africa needs to speak to its natural constituency in the USA, which is the generation that grew up supporting us during the worst years of apartheid. That's what they are afraid of, that we actually have a constituency in the USA.
How should our government respond then? I mean, there are those who argue that just give up. Nothing we do or say will convince the US Republican lawmakers otherwise. So they argue that silence and us not saying much is actually a diplomatic message as well. But does that work for us?
I think the first step that our government should do is to meet with the representatives of the 600 US companies that are making profits here in South Africa and going through Africa, the automotive companies, the mine owners, all of them, plus the companies in the USA from South Africa that employs thousands of USAs like the Sasol workers in Louisiana. I think that's our first leverage. Our second leverage has to be let our critical minerals like platinum speak for themselves. Let's drive a bargain. You see, Trump does not respect weakness. He does not abide begging. But we need to show what are our strengths as we go forward. And thirdly, we need to be able to utilize our geopolitical, multipolar and multilateral forums that we are in. And so, for example, part of this whole pushback from the USA comes because we had a very successful BRICS meeting in which BRICS said that we need to be strong in the trade war that the United States has started. Those are the leverages that we must be able to use so that we don't capitulate or surrender, but we also don't be cavalier about what we need from the United States.
Yeah, I mean, after that successful BRICS meeting, Trump came up and threatened us with a 10% additional tariff for our partnership and existence within the BRICS bloc. What is the U.S. criteria for sanctions, Mr. Rasool? I mean, they've lifted some sanctions since Trump's new administration. One that comes top of my mind is against Syria, for instance. Should this bill really go through the Senate, the House, the Senate, and then get on the desk of the president? Is this likely to be devastating? Should there be sanctions?
I think that we should be very nuanced about what sanctions the US is thinking of in terms of South Africa. You see, at first, AfriForum and Solidarity and others were just calling for a blanket punishment of South Africa. Kick us out of AGOA, kick us out of this. Until they realized, actually, that the owners of the farm that export fruit to the US are the very same white Afrikaners that they were saying were being victimized by a black government. Until they realized that the owners of the mines, the owners of the factories that export to the US are actually mostly white. And so they went back there in the time when I was still there at the end of February, beginning of March, and then said, listen, Trump administration, don't do the whole AGOA, don't do the whole sanctions. Actually, just sanction certain leaders, the black leaders in South Africa in the government of national unity. So they've changed their idea. And so I think that what they are trying to do is to target certain black leaders in South Africa and subject them to sanctions, and through that, hopefully create a momentum that white parties get a greater influence in the government of national unity and certainly in the forthcoming elections.
Ibrahim Rasool, former ambassador to the US.